Welcome, rational thinkers and champions of evidence-based reasoning, to the Free of Faith podcast. This is the place where we dare to peel back the comforting but opaque layers of faith-based claims and expose their logical shortcomings. Today, we're taking a long, honest look at a fundamental question. Would a truly rational and compassionate God endorse the kind of faith promoted in the Bible? Let's imagine a classroom where a teacher hands out a complex problem and forbids students from using reasoning, evidence, or any critical tools they've learned to solve it. The rule is simple: accept the answer printed in an old textbook. No discussion, no confirmation, and no inquiry. When one student raises a hand and asks if they can test the answer to understand it more deeply, the teacher scolds them. Real students trust, even when it makes no sense. Would we ever consider that to be a healthy learning environment? No. Yet that's strikingly similar to the structure of faith held up in many Christian traditions. Belief isn't cultivated through rigorous understanding or proportionate evidence. It's expected, regardless of either. And this is where the contradiction begins to surface. If God is not only loving but rational, if He is the source of truth itself, then what would justify encouraging belief that exceeds the available evidence? In any other domain, such as science, medicine, or law, believing more than the evidence supports is called overconfidence or error. Why should religious belief be the only area where evidential proportionality is disregarded? Let's be clear about what rational belief entails. A rational belief is one that aligns in degree with the strength of the evidence. If the evidence is weak, belief should be tentative. If the evidence is overwhelming, confidence may follow. But when a belief is maintained, or even celebrated, in the absence of evidence, or when it runs ahead of what the evidence supports, that particular belief ceases to be rational. And yet, biblical faith routinely elevates this exact kind of belief. Verses such as "We live by faith, not by sight," or "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe," directly encourage a belief posture not calibrated to evidence. The message is not believe to the extent that you are persuaded by the facts, but believe regardless. And this isn't a rare emphasis, it is the heartbeat of the doctrine. Consider how this unfolds in real-world practice. Children in many religious communities are often urged to accept Jesus into their hearts at very young ages. Does anyone check whether the child's belief proportionally maps to any evidence? Rarely. We seldom see an adult asking, "Does this child have the understanding of the evidence to rationally assess competing claims?" Instead, the belief is welcomed as redemptive without such checks of rationality. Systems of faith benefit from early and uncritical affirmation. Once someone has emotionally and socially invested in a belief, especially from a young age, it becomes significantly harder to evaluate it objectively later. And if you've been told that questioning your belief is dangerous or sinful, then the process of re-evaluation is discouraged before it even begins. This creates a landscape where beliefs are held with confidence, but without proportional evidence. And that is a dangerous epistemic model. Wherever belief untethered from evidence is encouraged, there you have the encouragement of irrationality. When such irrational belief is treated as virtuous, it undermines our entire framework for distinguishing between truth and error. Now, some will say that faith is meant to operate outside the bounds of ordinary rationality, that it's a special category. But if faith is immune to rational scrutiny, how can one determine whether it is justified? A belief that cannot be tested or questioned is a belief that can be mistaken indefinitely without correction. That's not trust in a higher truth, but an invitation to permanent error. And others argue that the human mind is limited, that God's ways transcend our comprehension. But even if that's true, that doesn't justify belief that overshoots the evidence. A God who gave humans the capacity for reason, skepticism, and critical thinking would not simultaneously require them to bypass those faculties when forming the most consequential beliefs of their lives. Would a God who values truth ask you to believe more strongly than the evidence justifies? The expectation that we should just believe, incommensurate with the degree of the relevant evidence, isn't just irrational. It's irreconcilable with the idea of a God who values honesty and intellectual integrity. Ask yourself, if a belief system is worth embracing, shouldn't it survive scrutiny? Questions lead us closer to truth, not further from it. Intellectual honesty is not a threat to belief. It is its only valid foundation. So why does so much of Christianity seem to run counter to this? Because it's not rooted in epistemic proportionality. It's rooted in expectation. The expectation that belief is a virtue, regardless of whether it maps to the evidence. That the strength of your commitment is what matters, not the strength of your reasons. That the willingness to affirm belief is more important than the understanding that led you there. That's where the entire framework breaks down. If belief untethered from proportionate evidence is celebrated, then any belief, no matter how unjustified, can be held with confidence. Once the principle that belief should match evidence is abandoned, we lose the only safeguard we have against error, delusion, and manipulation. Faith that exceeds the evidence is not a special kind of insight. It is a surrender of the very tools that distinguish justified belief from unjustified assumption. And that is not something a wise and compassionate God would ever endorse. If this conversation has sparked some questions or even some discomfort, that's a good thing. Questioning is the first step toward clarity. Don't settle for easy answers or platitudes. Dive deeper, explore further, and demand evidence. Head over to Free of Faith to read the full article and join the discussion. Let's keep this conversation going, because the pursuit of truth doesn't stop at questioning. It's about finding answers that actually make sense. Thank you for tuning in to the Free of Faith podcast, where we expose the logical failings of faith and celebrate the clarity that comes with reason. Until next time, stay skeptical, stay curious, and remember, rationality always outperforms faith. Engage reality, and I'll see you soon.